Star Wars Battlefront 2, especially at launch, is a tale that hardly needs to be recounted. This is the game that kickstarted the loot box conversation, especially amongst government bodies. It's the game that attracted attention to the topic and stigmatized loot boxes as a whole due to just how pay-to-win and egregious and awful this gambling-like system was. And given that EA pulled this, or tried to pull this, on a brand as big as freaking Star Wars, then there's a whole sense of pride and accomplishment response that made history by becoming the most downvoted comment in Reddit history that only made optics worse. And not to mention, the game itself launched in a poor state, lacking in content. It was buggy, technically flawed, unpolished, just all the bad signs of a rough AAA launch that just was rushed to release without consideration for the fact that people paid full price expecting a complete polished product. But the game has made something of a turnaround ever since its launch. After all the backlash the loot boxes garnered, those were outright removed essentially, at least the ability to pay for loot boxes. The monetization system was greatly improved, and then once they overhauled the progression system, they actually managed to get good content rolling out over time. And eventually, the game's optics sort of improved, and now people deem Battlefront 2 to be in a pretty good state. Which is why Battlefront 2 players are now saddened to hear that there will be no more major content updates for the title. DICE is moving on to their next project. The following information was relayed on the official Battlefront 2 website in a blog post whose headline reads, "After 2+ years of free content, the vision for Star Wars Battlefront 2 is now complete." The game launched back in November 2017, so it's been around 2.5 years since that rough launch, and the game has made great strides since. But we're at a point where the team's ready to move on, which comes in shortly after news of Battlefield 5 having support being ended. So here's what creative director Dennis Brandval had to say about all of this. For more than 2 years, the team has deployed 25 free content updates that have shaped and expanded Star Wars Battlefront 2 into something truly special for Star Wars fans. We've introduced game-changing heroes, fan-favorite reinforcements, exotic planets, and epic new ways to play across all three cinematic eras. We have also shared in your excitement along the way. As developers, it's incredibly fulfilling to see players of all kinds living out their Star Wars fantasies in our game. Today we're bringing you the details on what's coming to Star Wars Battlefront 2 in the next content update, named The Battle on Scarif, where we return to the tropical battlefront inspired by Rogue One, a Star Wars story. This edition accentuates the incredible breadth of Star Wars Battlefront 2, which by the time of Scarif's release will include content inspired by all Star Wars theatrical releases. Since launch, we have brought new content in the form of free updates to the entire player base, delivering immersive Star Wars battles you can play solo with friends and against others across the entire Skywalker saga. This vision will now be realized as we complete our return to the Age of Rebellion, which we started in February. Looking beyond April, we are transitioning to a phase where the servers, in-game challenges, recurring events such as double XP and more, and game support will carry this broad and rich Star Wars gaming experience into the future. This means that we're moving away from delivering regular content updates. As the game lives on with the players in our community, we're looking forward to hearing your stories for years to come. So basically, they've gotten to a point where they're maintaining the game and keeping the servers up and refreshing certain aspects. But as far as major updates goes, this is the last one. The Battle of Scarif, inspired by events of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, will be the last major piece of expansion and DLC that'll be coming to this game. Electronic Arts then proceeded to further clarify all of this in a short statement sent out to various news outlets that reads, "The team at DICE is working on the next standalone Battlefield 5 update releasing this summer and continuing their work on delivering community games. games. While the studio's vision for Star Wars Battlefront 2 is now complete with this week's The Battle of Scarif update, the servers, in-game challenges, recurring events, and game support will continue as the game lives on with players and the community. We're looking forward to hearing player stories for both games for years to come. Longer term, the studio is focused on the future of Battlefield that we'll be bringing to players in 2021. So this is likely the main reason for why both Battlefield 5 and Star Wars Battlefront 2 are seizing major new content updates and that level of support. The team is essentially moving on. All that manpower is being shifted to whatever the next Battlefield game might be, which isn't being released this year. There's no new Battlefield game this year, as relayed by industry insider Daniel Ahmad back in October 2019. Quote, EA confirmed the next Battlefield game will ship in fiscal year 2022. This is the year starting April 2021 and ending March 2022. So the most likely scenario is that the next Battlefield game will launch sometime in October or November 2021. EA is actually giving developers more time to create the next Battlefield game rather than rushing it out, which is probably prudent given the PR nightmare that Battlefield 5 suffered after its less than ceremonious reveal with that whimsical take on World War II, and after the game was poorly received at launch due to a lack of content, just a technically flawed launch. Now, generally speaking, from what I've seen, people seem pretty disappointed that Battlefront 2 is coming to an end, given that it feels like there's still much that the developers can do with this title, expanded further with new characters and new worlds that haven't been implemented into the game yet that are part of the Star Wars canon. But at the same time, this isn't a Battlefield 5-like scenario where the game is coming to a close before it feels like it's in a good place or before it's really finished. For those who don't know, Battlefield 5 essentially ended at Chapter 6, and many were looking forward to Chapter 7 and beyond because that's when we were going to delve into things like Normandy, perhaps, a major aspect of World War II, but the game didn't even get there before the developers decided to call it quits. This is a title that is a World War II game that didn't really complete World War II before the developers and the publisher gave up on it, and not to mention the game is in a state where people feel is poorly balanced, where it's still not in a good place, technically and mechanically speaking. It just feels like Battlefield 5 never found its footing, unlike Battlefront 2. The developers didn't really fix that experience and finish it before moving on. There is a sense of good enough with Battlefront 2, not so with Battlefield 5. And you can even sense that EA and DICE are more ashamed of Battlefield 5 and more proud of Battlefront 2 based on how they announced the end of big content updates for both of these games. With Battlefield 5, it wasn't clear that the game would be ending at Chapter 6 until the Battlefield 5 Twitter page responded to fan tweets. So this individual asked, is this confirming that Chapter 7 will be the last major chapter or update? And then they responded, there is no new chapter. There is no Chapter 7 even, but there will be standalone update this summer with new content, weapons, and game tweaks. And when people ask for clarification on whether the game will receive no new maps, weapons, factions after the summer update alongside with no new chapter, they confirmed correct and will have more details about what's included in the summer update closer to that time. So it was very low-key the way they announced Battlefield 5's end. Whereas with Battlefront 2, they made a whole blog post about it and proudly declared Battlefront 2 is now complete. And there's just more of a sense of pride and accomplishment with Battlefront 2 than there is with Battlefield 5. Now, Battlefield 5 being abandoned didn't surprise me at all. The game did not meet sales expectations when the sales for this game were reported back in February 2019, and the game has struggled to maintain some semblance of popularity due to the rough journey and road as far as the technical and mechanical aspects of the game goes, and the fact that there was just a lack of content and there was just such a lack of momentum with this title because of how badly managed it was. Battlefront 2 eventually picked up, so I expected that this game would be supported for much longer, but I guess that just isn't where the money is for EA. They did have to dial back microtransactions quite a bit for Battlefront 2, so maybe it's not bringing in as much money as EA would like, despite the comeback it's made from a quality perspective. It would seem as though EA has deemed the next Battlefield project the big money maker, and so they're pulling all stops and pulling all manpower from DICE away from these two projects, Battlefield 5 and Battlefront 2, and pouring everything into the next Battlefield title in the hopes that it ends up selling well, and no doubt it'll have some kind of microtransaction system. Maybe it'll be closer to, battle passes that have become more popular in the AAA landscape. Hard to say, and we'll see how that game turns out. But I do think it is a shame that Battlefront 2 couldn't be supported for longer. It did seem to have much longer legs than Battlefield 5. But hey, Battlefront 2 did get major content updates that encompass the mainline movies in the Star Wars saga, and it did leave off in a relatively good place. At least it does feel like Battlefront 2 made great strides, and its end was more ceremonious, whereas Battlefield 5's end felt pretty pathetic and meager. So that's one man's take on Electronic Arts and DICE ending major content updates and long-term support for Battlefield 5 and Battlefront 2 beyond just the basic maintenance stuff. Let me know in the comments below what your take is on this situation and the state of Battlefield 5 and Battlefront 2 right before support for both titles were pulled. Drop a comment below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.